When Barron Trump stepped onto the stage at a nationally televised town hall, he came armed with confidence, rehearsed lines, and the unmistakable swagger of someone used to controlling the room. His target? None other than Denzel Washington, a cultural icon known for his unwavering integrity and sharp intellect. Barron's goal was clear: challenge Denzel, question his methods, and score a viral moment by painting him as just another loud voice in America's culture wars. But what unfolded next wasn't the fiery exchange Barron had anticipated. Instead, Denzel delivered a calm, piercing response that dismantled Barron's argument without raising his voice. What was meant to be Barron's triumph turned into a public lesson and left him stunned into silence on live TV. Denzel Washington, gravitas without gimmicks. Opposite Barron Trump sat Denzel Washington, an actor, director, philanthropist, and one of the most enduring cultural pillars of American life. He wasn't there to trend. He wasn't there to collect sound bites. His reputation wasn't built on algorithms or engineered viral moments. It was forged in decades of steady, principled work, both on and off the screen. Denzel's gravitas had been earned the hard way, through action, not performance. While his Hollywood accolades filled shelves, it was his work beyond the cameras that quietly defined him. For years, Denzel had mentored young people, funded scholarships, advocated for criminal justice reform, and stood alongside families whose names would never make the headlines. He didn't publicize these moments. He didn't need to. In an era where celebrity activism often arrives adorned in hashtags, Denzel chose to move differently. He didn't posture. He didn't clamor for center stage. Instead, he walked into rooms and shifted their gravity just by being there. His decision to appear at the town hall that night wasn't a publicity grab. He wasn't angling for a campaign or a media rollout. He came because he believed in real dialogue, in unscripted, uncomfortable conversations. Denzel Washington didn't demand respect. He simply embodied it. Barron Trump, a name that opens doors. Across from him sat Barron Trump, 18 years old, carrying a last name that had cleared paths for him before he could walk them himself. In just a few short months, Barron had become a rising star in conservative media circles. His sharp suits, clean delivery, and ability to hold his composure under lights had made him a frequent guest on youth panels and podcast circuits. He was polished, articulate, and camera-ready. But he was also untested. He had no formal background in policy. He hadn't spent years immersed in the communities he so often spoke about. What he had was access, instant, inherited, and largely unchallenged. His father's longtime advisors had quietly cautioned him against attending this particular event. Policy forums aren't campaign rallies, they told him. People don't cheer sound bites here, they interrogate them. But Barron waved them off. He was confident, maybe too confident. He had a plan: hit the talking points, stay calm, control the narrative. What he didn't realize was that the room he'd just walked into would operate on a different wavelength. The room, substance over sound bites. The town hall had been billed as a serious, youth-centered dialogue about some of the most pressing issues facing the next generation: climate change, criminal justice reform, digital privacy, and freedom of speech. The moderator carefully balanced the conversation, weaving between lawmakers, community activists, and young people with skin in the game. Denzel arrived ready for real conversation. Other panelists leaned in, engaged, asked follow-ups, admitted when they didn't have all the answers. Barron, by contrast, seemed locked into his pre-game routine. He scribbled notes furiously, whispered to his aides between questions, and adjusted his blazer sleeves with the same deliberate precision his father was known for. During a brief intermission, Elijah Moreno, a 19-year-old community organizer from Fresno, leaned over and quietly suggested to Barron, "Let the conversation breathe a little." Barron smirked and waved him off. "I got this." That moment never aired, but people in the room remembered it. The setup. Barron's challenge. When Barron Trump's moment finally arrived, he didn't approach it as a question. It was a move, a calculated, pre-scripted challenge carefully crafted to resonate online. He straightened his posture, adjusted his cuff, and delivered his line with steady, deliberate cadence, each word landing exactly where he intended. "Mr. Washington," he began, using the formal title to maintain an air of respect, but his tone hinted at the confrontation to follow. "I've followed your work, your interviews, your public commentary. Don't you think there's a difference between fighting for justice and being addicted to conflict? Sometimes it seems like you care more about being loud than being right." Barron paused right on cue, just as his media team had likely rehearsed. The pause wasn't for reflection, it was for effect. This was supposed to be his viral moment, the challenge, the smirk, the timing. He let the silence linger long enough to register on camera, his self-assured expression signaling that he believed he had struck the right chord. His confidence wasn't spontaneous. It was rehearsed. This wasn't curiosity, it was strategy. Barron thought he had landed the perfect hit, expecting the next moment to tilt the room in his favor. The response, Denzel's masterclass in presence. But Denzel didn't flinch. He didn't shuffle his notes or adjust his seat. He didn't need to. He simply looked at Barron. It wasn't the kind of look that aimed to intimidate. It was the kind of look that saw through him, that knew the difference between a soundbite and substance. His reply came without urgency, without a raised voice, without showmanship. "Barron," he said quietly. No title, no performative courtesy, just the name. Level, director. "The problem with speaking before you've lived," Denzel continued, his voice steady as a stone, "is that you confuse volume with vision." The room locked into stillness. No gasps, no applause, just silence. It wasn't the response Barron had expected. It wasn't a counterattack. It was a surgical dismantling. Barron's instinct was to jump in. "I'm just saying—" Denzel's hand moved slightly. Firm, controlled. He didn't raise his voice, but the interjection carried the full weight of experience. "No, son, you're not just saying, you're performing." His words didn't just push back, they revealed. They exposed the machinery behind Barron's carefully constructed moment. "And this isn't the kind of stage where I hand out applause for weak material." Barron's practiced composure wavered, if only for a second. The power of stillness Denzel didn't need to elevate his tone. His authority wasn't drawn from volume, it came from depth, from having lived what he was speaking, from having mentored young people who'd been failed by the system, from having stood in courtrooms where tone didn't save anyone's future. The power of the moment wasn't in the put-down, it wasn't in any theatrical retort, it was in Denzel's stillness, his refusal to turn the exchange into a show. Barron's challenge, carefully constructed for the cameras, had collapsed under its own weight. What lingered wasn't the silence that follows a knockout punch. It was the silence that comes when someone finally recognizes they've been speaking, but they haven't been saying anything that matters. Denzel didn't seek to embarrass him. He wasn't interested in winning points. He was teaching, a masterclass in presence, in patience, in the kind of wisdom that doesn't need to announce itself. And in that moment, everyone watching understood. Some rooms aren't built for performances. They're built for truth. The weight of experience. Denzel continued, his voice low but resonant, weaving in stories from decades of mentorship, recounting conversations with boys from neighborhoods where camera crews don't bother to show up. He told of a 12-year-old suspended from school not for breaking rules, but for defending his dignity when a teacher mocked his dialect. "That's not outrage," Denzel said. "That's survival. That's a man using every tool he has to lift those nobody else is listening to. You call it branding. I call it breathing when the system is choking you." His words weren't weapons, they were windows. Barron's posture began to crack. He blinked. His fingers tightened around the mic as if searching for a script that no longer applied. "The real question you should be asking," Denzel said, leaning forward with a calm that carried the weight of decades, "is why so many people still need defending in the first place." The aftermath. When the room stops. Caring about your name. Barron had no response. There were no applause lines left, no clever retorts, no room to pivot. The crowd didn't erupt. They didn't need to. They simply watched, letting the silence do the work. By the time the segment ended, social media was ablaze. Headlines popped up instantly. Denzel silences Barron Trump when gravitas meets hubris, a lesson in presence. But most missed the depth of the exchange. It wasn't a takedown. It was a reality check. It was what happens when someone who has spent a lifetime earning their platform confronts someone who thought the platform was the victory. This wasn't about Barron's last name. It was about what happens when you walk into a room that doesn't care who you are, a room where power isn't given, it's earned, moment by moment. Barron would continue to build his career, no doubt, but somewhere deep in his memory, the weight of that moment would linger. The day he met a man who didn't raise his voice, didn't chase a headline, but simply, calmly, told the truth. The struggle for control, a quiet storm. Denzel Washington never raised his voice, but the force behind his words was undeniable. The room had expected a confrontation, a clash of volume and intensity, but instead they got something far more commanding: calm, unyielding truth. When Denzel locked eyes with Barron, it wasn't a challenge born from anger or theatrics. It was a steady, unblinking connection that carried decades of lived experience. The silence that followed was thick with anticipation and gravity. "You think this is about being loud," he began, voice even but penetrating. "Let me tell you something." There was no rush, no embellishment, just the weight of someone who had witnessed injustice firsthand. He spoke not as a performer but as a witness, a soldier in a long, ongoing battle. "When I was doing this work," he continued, "I was sitting in real courtrooms in real communities, watching judges tell young black girls they were too emotional after they'd been assaulted." His gaze swept across the room, capturing the attention of everyone. Not a single person dared to look away. This was a memory that demanded acknowledgement. "I've seen how silence is used like a weapon, not just to shut people up, but to shut people out, to erase them." He paused. It wasn't for dramatic effect. It was a space to let the weight of those words settle, to let the room breathe and reflect. "So no, I don't quiet down to make people comfortable." A lesson in the power of silence. The room was so quiet you could have heard a pin drop. No applause followed. There was no call for understanding or validation. What hung in the air was clarity, raw and unadorned. For everyone watching, from the young students sitting in the back to the seasoned political aides and staffers, this wasn't a debate anymore. This was a lesson in the power of voice, silence, and the space between. Denzel didn't speak for a long moment after that. He let the silence underscore the gravity of what he'd just said. Then, looking back to Barron, he continued, "You've lived in a world," his voice steady, "where you get the benefit of the doubt before you even open your mouth." The statement wasn't accusatory. It was matter of fact, a quiet acknowledgement of a deeply entrenched societal privilege. "Most of the people I stand for," he said, "don't even get the benefit of being heard." There was no anger here, only a steady, hard truth that landed like a stone skipping over calm water, resonating far beyond the surface. When Barron labeled Denzel's words outrage, it was as if he was misunderstanding the very nature of what he was witnessing. "What I hear," Denzel said, unwavering, "is you're making me uncomfortable by refusing to shrink." The unblinking gaze fixed on Barron was relentless, uncompromising. The weight of tone. Beyond surface judgments. Barron was momentarily frozen. This wasn't the sparring match he'd rehearsed. His words had been pointed, but they lacked the depth, the lived reality, the emotional heft Denzel brought to the table. His eyes flicked toward the moderator, searching for rescue, for a way out, but none came. Finally, with a hint of stiffness barely masking uncertainty, Barron offered, "I respect your position, but I still think tone matters in public service." That was the opening Denzel had been waiting for. His response would ripple far beyond that room, echoed in viral clips and social media debates for weeks to come. "You care about tone," Denzel said, "because you don't know what it feels like to need content. No shouting, no fingerprinting, just that sharp, quiet rhythm, the kind of delivery that slides past partisanship and lands in your gut." It was no longer about Denzel alone. It was about every person who had ever been told they were too loud, too much, or too emotional, when in reality they were just tired of being ignored, dismissed, and erased. But then came the real shift, the moment that transformed the entire atmosphere. Denzel repeated the word, softer now, as if it itself had missed the point. Tone. The shift. Respect, discomfort, or strategy. Barron didn't interrupt. Was it respect? Discomfort? A strategic decision to wait for a better moment? Hard to say. But whatever it was, something in him changed. His body relaxed ever so slightly. He was no longer leaning forward aggressively, but he wasn't retreating either. His energy softened, like someone waiting for permission to breathe freely. Denzel turned toward the audience, not away from Barron but beyond him, extending the moment outward. "We've reached a place," he said, "where young people are invited into rooms like this, but only if they're polite, only if they nod, smile, and say thank you for crumbs." The students in the back exchanged glances, a look of recognition passing between them. This wasn't defiance, it was acknowledgement. They had lived that tightrope walk. To be heard, you had to be measured, palatable, agreeable. Denzel didn't flinch. "I want young people to speak. I want you to challenge me. But don't walk in with scripted punches and expect me to flinch." His gaze swung back to Barron, firm but not aggressive. "I've buried friends because of failed systems. You've been featured in magazines for being tall." The masterclass in control Denzel Washington's voice never rose. He didn't need to summon volume to assert his presence. His every word, every pause, every breath became a masterclass in restraint and control. This wasn't theater, it wasn't performance, it was presence, solid, immovable, undeniable. Where others might have leaned into applause lines or used bravado as a shield, Denzel used stillness as his sharpest instrument. He didn't need the crowd's validation. He wasn't aiming to win the room. He was there to tell the truth, and to tell it in a way that would linger. You didn't just hear Denzel speak that night, you felt him teach. The silence stretched for a moment longer before Barron finally broke it. "I think I see your point," he said, though even as the words left his mouth, they wavered, unsure whether they were an admission or a soft retreat. His confidence, so carefully staged at the outset, had thinned. Denzel's smile in response wasn't smug. It wasn't the grin of someone who had just landed a knockout punch. It was a knowing smile, the kind that said, "You may not agree yet, but now you're listening." And that was enough. Beyond partisanship, shedding the armor. People had entered the auditorium wearing their political allegiances like armor. Some had arrived to defend their teams, their talking points, their pre-scripted beliefs. But now, slowly, you could almost see those barriers being set down. It was no longer about left or right, red or blue, family legacies or public personas. It was about something more fundamental, about who had lived the weight of their words and who was simply borrowing them. For the first time that night, Barron didn't stand as a speaker, a strategist, or a name to headline a panel. He sat as a student. And Denzel? He didn't bask in the moment. He didn't lean into the power of it. There was no victory lap, no self-congratulation. He simply folded his hands quietly and waited for the next question. But even as the moderator moved to transition, the silence in the room told a different story. The echo of memory. While the program creaked forward, attempting to reset its rhythm, the air in the auditorium never quite returned to neutral. The people seated there weren't restless. They weren't impatient for the next question. They were locked in. Their eyes flicked between Denzel and Barron, not like spectators at a sporting event, but like witnesses to something they understood was not supposed to happen this way, not on live TV. And then, without any cue, Denzel leaned back ever so slightly. The silence had grown roots, and he chose not to fill it with noise but with depth. "I wasn't always on stages like this," he began, his voice calm, carrying the weight of deep stone and still water. "I wasn't born into networks. I didn't have a platform waiting for me." His words landed softly but carried like iron. "I spent 12 years defending people nobody wanted to hear from. Nobody." The room hushed further, not because they were being polite but because they understood instinctively that what followed was not for the cameras. It was for them. From the ground up, the story of Marcus Bellamy. "There was a case," Denzel continued, letting each word find its place. "Marcus Bellamy, 8th grader, suspended, charged." He paused, letting the question arrive on its own. "Why?" he asked, his voice steady. "Because he yanked his backpack away when a school officer grabbed it." Denzel stopped, letting the weight of that land. "They said he was being aggressive," he said slowly. "But what he was really doing was trying to hold on to a notebook." Another pause. "Inside it," Denzel said, soft enough that the room leaned in. "Drawings, anime, a sketch of Sonic the Hedgehog." He didn't speed through the story. He didn't dramatize it for effect. He let it arrive as it was. Simple, devastating, real. The system didn't ask questions. The system didn't care about the contents of the notebook. Marcus was processed, labeled, treated like a threat, made to feel disposable. At 13 years old, you could almost hear people blink. His mother, Denzel added, worked 2 jobs and slept in her car during the trial just to make the hearings. Then Denzel lifted his gaze, not accusatory, but precise. The myth of calmness, a hard truth. Denzel pressed on, steady and unflinching. "There's this story people tell," he said, "that black men who speak plainly, who speak with weight, are angry. That we're aggressive. That we're performative." He shifted in his seat slightly, leaning just enough toward Barron to signal intent, not aggression. "Try surviving in rooms that weren't built for you," he said. "Rooms where being calm gets you ignored and being direct gets you labeled." He let the silence breathe. "Then tell me," he added, "how much tone matters." Barron didn't move. He didn't need to. The audience could see the shift within him. He had entered expecting a fight, a stage, a moment to showcase his preparation. But this was a lesson in controlled fire, in speaking with the weight of memory without burning the whole place down. Denzel leaned in again, not to intimidate, but to lead. "You want to lead?" he asked. "Then ask better questions, not the kind that go viral, the kind that keep you up at night." His gaze didn't break. "Ask yourself, who would you lose votes for? What would you risk your career for? And if the answer is nothing, then you're not ready." The line didn't ignite applause. It didn't need to. It settled, heavy, like truth always does when it chooses not to entertain. A moment not built for television. Moments like this weren't supposed to happen on live television, not in tightly timed programs with commercial breaks waiting, graphics prepped, and producers pacing nervously behind the scenes. TV thrives on neat sound bites, predictable rhythms, controlled exchanges. It's built for rehearsed talking points and packaged zingers, not for raw, unscripted human growth. And yet, nobody cut to black. No one pulled the plug. The cameras stayed on. Barron Trump adjusted his mic, the once smooth confidence in his body now tinged with hesitation. His fingers lingered over the stand, a visible search for composure. He looked down for a beat, gathering himself, then met Denzel's gaze again. "I didn't mean any disrespect," Barron said quietly, his voice stripped of its earlier sharpness, now measured, tentative. The volume was lower, but the honesty carried. "I thought I was prepared," he admitted, his words arriving like a slow realization instead of a crafted response. I see I missed something." Across from him, Denzel didn't gloat. He didn't crack a wide, triumphant smile. He simply nodded. Calm, steady, gracious. Then take that, he said, his voice unwavering, and grow. His next words floated in the quiet like a stone skipping over glassy water. The internet had already decided. By the time the next panelist cleared their throat, attempting to drag the conversation back to the scheduled topic, it was already too late. Clips were already spreading across the internet, but this time, people weren't replaying the flashy verbal jabs or the big rehearsed applause lines. They were circulating the silences, the quiet. It was Denzel's steady reminder, "The mic doesn't make you right," and Barron's barely whispered response, "I see I missed something," that people seized upon. Because those moments didn't feel produced, they felt real. And in the middle of that authenticity, the tone of the entire evening had shifted. It wasn't just a change in the air between Denzel and Barron. The whole room had softened. The boundaries between performer and audience, between political theater and human connection, had cracked wide open. What had begun as a carefully scripted policy forum had unexpectedly transformed into something raw, unscripted, and profoundly human. When performance yields to presence, Barron Trump had walked onto that stage ready to perform. He'd been trained, coached, and equipped with clean counters and debate-friendly pivots, but now he wasn't performing anymore. He was processing. The tension that had filled the early minutes of their exchange hadn't disappeared. It had evolved into something weightier. It was no longer about scoring points. It was about sitting with truths he hadn't fully considered. Denzel's stories didn't function like talking points. They weren't bulletproof narratives designed to win headlines. They were lived experiences, etched into memory, carried in the names, documents, and pain that no one could simply argue away. There was no rebuttal for that, no study, no counter-statistic, no prepared retort. This wasn't a debate anymore. It had quietly become something else entirely, presence meeting entitlement, with no place left to hide. Barron's body language told the story before his next words did. He still sat upright, still composed, but the edge was gone. The calculated gleam that so often accompanies political scions in the spotlight had dimmed. What remained was something closer to humility, an uncomfortable but necessary shedding of armor. The conversation tries to move on, but the room hasn't. The moderator, sensing the need to regain structure, attempted to reset. He shifted to the next prepared question, something about digital privacy laws, but his words floated unnoticed. The audience wasn't ready to move on. Not yet. The air was still heavy with what had just transpired. You could feel it. The stillness wasn't from disengagement, but from deep reflection. It wasn't the volume of Denzel's voice that anchored the room. It was the undeniable weight behind every word. Even as the program pivoted, nothing truly shifted. Not yet. The room was still there, still perched on the edge of their seats, still processing. The clips that had already begun to spread weren't the usual ones, not the flashy gotcha moments, not the applause lines. It was the silences, the weighty pauses. Denzel saying the mic doesn't make you right. Barron whispering, "I see I missed something." Those fragments resonated precisely because they were unscripted, unfiltered, rare. They weren't designed to trend, but they did, because people recognized something truthful when they saw it. The power of admission. Back on stage, the moderator carefully extended the opportunity. "Would you like to respond?" he asked Barron, as if not wanting to break whatever fragile honesty had settled over the space. Barron hesitated. And that hesitation, small as it seemed, said everything. 15 minutes earlier, Barron had walked in eager to dominate, to win the room with sharp lines and poise. Now, his posture told a different story. "I think I came here trying to sound smart," he said slowly, as though he was still arriving at the thought even as he spoke it. "But maybe I should have come here to ask better questions." No applause followed, no dramatic swell of music, just a hush, the kind that only happens when people are actually listening. Denzel didn't respond. He didn't need to. The lesson had already landed. It was being received, not defended against. A blueprint, not a takedown. This moment wasn't about winning a debate. It wasn't about delivering the most quotable line. It was about what happens when someone shows up expecting a performance and instead meets presence, when they walk in ready to be seen and walk out having actually felt something. What Denzel offered wasn't a takedown. It was a blueprint, a masterclass in holding the line without snapping it, in teaching without condescension, in modeling strength without humiliation. And what Barron offered, whether he planned to or not, was equally rare. He stayed. He didn't storm off. He didn't double down. He sat in the discomfort and let it shape him. Growth. In real time. Later that night, Barron quietly posted a short video from his phone. No production team, no edits, no music layered over his words. Just him, alone in the frame. "Last night, I tried to make a point," he said, "and got taught a better one. You don't have to agree with someone to learn from them, and I learned something." It wasn't a press release. It wasn't strategy. It was a fragment of real growth, perhaps the beginning of something larger. Denzel never responded directly. There were no media tours, no victory laps, but his team released a single line, posted without hashtags, without branding. Public spaces work best when people show up ready to listen. That includes us all. It wasn't a debate, it was growth. Real, visible, unguarded growth, the kind you almost never see on camera. Barron had come in ready to win the room. What made the moment matter is that he let himself be changed by it. And Denzel? He didn't win with volume. He won with depth. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can say is, "I missed something," and the most powerful thing you can do is listen like you mean it.